Okay. And your host today are AK.
And Ivanna. And in the studio with us, we have Mary Lemmer, who is the founder of Improve. Mary, how about you tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yes, I'm Mary, and I'm the founder of Improve, and we empower leaders, teams, and companies to, well, improve. And we do that using a unique methodology that takes improv inspired activities and principles that are supported by research so that it's really effective and it just so happens to be fun. So we've worked with companies all over the world, helping them grow their teams, solve big problems, launch new products, go through complete transformations, and excited to be here today to talk about Zebra apps and kind of what they're going through as well.
Oh, that's awesome. When I saw your LinkedIn profile, I was like, this is everything in one. Like this is improv, but it's also research based. That's awesome. I'm so happy that you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that we're trying to bring the worlds of like not change doesn't have to be scary, and we can find really effective ways of creating change and leading to growth. And we're all improvising all the time, whether we realize it or not. So I found that improv really lends itself to some of what we're going to talk about today because it's actually mimics life and business, right? Because no one totally can predict everything that's going to happen next.
Mm.
Yeah, I was just saying before when we just said hello that I feel very safe because I'm in a room with two improvisers, and it's really great to be with just these improv enthusiasts. So
That's right. You can't do
I'm
anything
excited.
wrong when you're with improvisers.
We'll just stroll with
Exactly,
whatever comes.
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And
Exactly.
actually, on that note, I do just want to say that we're recording this call. Ivanna is in California now, like
Yes,
we
I made it.
talked about in the last episode, which is great. So this means that the time is a bit late here in Denmark, and I have a 1-year-old, so I might have to leave if she suddenly cries. And now you know why if I suddenly leave the conversation. But I'll be back, and I know that Mary and Ivanna will improvise.
That's right. That's
We'll
right.
hold the fort.
Yeah, thank you.
Play the scene
All
out.
right. But to get started on the episode, let's hear from you, Mary. If you, in your own words, could please just recap for us what this episode for today was about.
Yeah, well, if I were to summarize it very succinctly and in one sentence, I would say that this episode was about attempts to solve their team communication and culture problems that have been identified as partially to blame for their attrition. And that's high level. Now, there's some specific things that happen that involve cinnamon rolls and soda machines, and Eric telling Marie she should join engineering to coach, and some role changes. And I think also in this episode, we have a colleague being accused of being anorexic, which is a big moment too. So I'm sure we'll get into some of the details of the episode, but from a high level, this was really about them just trying to address what has kind of surfaced as these like team communication and culture problems, trying to solve this attrition problem.
I think that's a great way to summarize it, that it's all about the attempts.
Yeah. Keyword attempts.
Yeah. Well, I would be curious to hear first about we start kind of with this CFO search situation,
Mm-hmm.
where there's an attempt to find a new CFO, but it's kind of they're struggling with finding the right kind of candidate.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, are CFOs typically only one kind, or are there many different kinds out there?
I mean, there of course there's many different kinds, right? Like every individual is different in some regard. I thought their way of like, oh, do we need someone with this like finance heavy background versus not, like that conversation that I think was coming up between Marie and Mark, right, in HR,
Mm.
and I thought that was a very like simplistic way to look at it, honestly. And one of the pieces of advice as I was looking through like how would I approach this with them is really to one look at this role and what they need and actually like list it out, because there was a lot of like conversations and a lot of opinions, it seemed like. But what might actually help them is to say, what do we need this person to do? And what skills would that person have? And like really starting to look at it visually and then be able to kind of reverse engineer like, who might this person be? Where, what might they have studied? And there was one, like, I think the the like subjectivity of it, like if they started to make it a little more objective of just these are the things we need, these are the skills this person must have, it would give them a guide to be able to say, oh, this person matches this or not, right? It's in many ways it's like similar to anything. When you're looking for something, if you don't know what you're looking for, it's a lot harder to find. But if you know really clearly what you're looking for, then when you start to see it, it's like, oh, this is clear. And
Mm.
I didn't see in that conversation them actually sitting down to agree on what they're both looking for, because they were kind of, there wasn't really a consensus around that. And I think if they looked at, like they looked at having that conversation of let's get on the same page of what this person needs to be, then it would go a lot smoother in finding that person. But they need to start there, and they weren't really, it didn't seem like they were on the same page of what they were looking for in this role.
I got a sense that like Marie's kind of primary focus in this beginning of the chapter was actually, or section was actually that she would prefer to be someone who would not know a lot about the details of what the team was doing. So like really this idea of kind of separating or having a person who is a people leader but is not necessarily an expert within finance.
Yeah.
And I was curious to hear your opinion on this. Like, do you think it's a good strategy to have a leader who is who doesn't have an understanding of what the employees are doing? Is that an advantage, or is that a disadvantage?
I mean, I could argue it either way, right? And I think my initial response when I saw that, that's like where Marie was headed. I'm like, why can't you have both? Like, why can't you have someone who's a great leader of a team and also who has great experience in the domain of which the team is? Like, you don't need to choose this or that. And I thought that was really kind of interesting and almost like thinking very small or limiting to be like, we have to choose. It's like very binary versus saying we could have both. Let's find someone who has both. But to your question, what's that? I feel like so often people are like, oh, you should hire people that are smarter than you, right? So the people on the team should actually know more and be smarter. And I think there's something to be said for that. But then there's also this piece around trust, right? And if you're on a team and you're being led by someone who has no experience in the domain of which the team is, like that could be really detrimental to just the team trusting this leader. And I've definitely been on teams where the leader did not have experience in the domain, and it truly was like a little bit harder to kind of trust them as a leader because they hadn't done or seen some of the things that would really bolster that trust. So again, it's like, yeah, you do want people that are smarter than you that are working on the team, but I do think that there's a level of expertise or domain knowledge that is really helpful for building that trust, and also noticing like pattern recognition, right? Of like, okay, I've seen this happen before. Like I can use that expertise to guide this team in a direction so we avoid those potholes that are very common in this particular domain. So I guess like again, either way, there's pros and cons of that. But ultimately, I would say, Marie, like let's get someone who's competent in finance and also a great leader. Like you can have both. And that is like
Yeah.
perfectly acceptable to say that we want a CFO that's a great leader and also knows what a balance sheet is.
Yeah.
I would be curious to unfold this trust part,
Mm.
because we just established that expertise can be one of the reasons why someone would trust a leader. What other reasons would you have to trust your leader?
I think, and I'm going to bring this up because it's also part of this episode, around communication and transparency and approachability. At some point in the episode, Marie says to Mark, "But I can't navigate it if I don't know what it is."
Mm.
And it became really clear to me in that moment that, and among other kind of evidence throughout catching up with the story and reading this episode, that there's some hoarding of information here, and especially in this dynamic between Mark and Marie, and possibly in other aspects of the organization. And so, but in order for someone to feel trust, communication breeds trust, right? That connection, those touch points. So if you're you're not being included in what's going on, or you kind of have this black box of sorts between you and someone else on the company, in the company, especially on your own team, and the leader of your team, um, that then these stories start to fill that space, right? When there's space between, that's just like silence or not communicating, that's when the stories breed, and someone might be like, okay, they're considering firing me, or they're making these changes, or maybe I'm not doing my job well enough. And so I think that is such an underrated, like very simple way to foster trust, is to just communicate, and sometimes over communicate. Just because you think inherently that someone knows something, maybe they don't. We can't, it's like the paradox of knowledge. Like someone knows something, they just assume everyone else knows it. But Mark may have information, he probably definitely has information that is not going to be obvious to everyone else because they're not in the same meetings he is, or he sees things from a different perspective. So I think being able to communicate with the team in a way that is consistent, clear, and builds confidence is crucial for trust. And so that may mean weekly one-on-ones with the team, right? Or a team meeting where they can surface stuff that's going on and everyone can get on the same page and people feel included in what's going on. Which then brings to another kind of like setting team rituals and having different kind of places and placeholders and systems and processes in place that are conducive to building that trust. Like one of my favorites is Tiny Things Tuesday, where every Tuesday there's like a quick, maybe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, where the team gets together and they get to surface tiny things that are bothering them that week, or tiny things that, that need to be paid attention to, or tiny things they want to celebrate. Because a lot of times, especially in fast growing companies, or companies that are undergoing change, those tiny things just get brushed under the rug, but tiny things eventually become big things if they're not addressed. So I think those kinds of rituals and the consistency of communication and the clarity of communication are non-expertise ways to build trust among teams.
That's a very lovely concrete example of something to do. I love that.
There you go, Zebra apps.
Sorry, Ivanna.
Free advice for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love that. I wonder if you would say that the cinnamon bun Friday tradition is a tiny thing.
I have opinions about the cinnamon buns.
Tell me.
First of all, like the cinnamon buns and the soda machines, as I read, I'm like, is this supposed to be mocking all the stupid, meaningless perks that companies offer that actually aren't that great, let alone inclusive or valuable? Because I just was like, this is hilarious. It was so funny to me that I feel like the Cinnabons represented like all of these meaningless empty perks. Hashtag empty perk. One, it really, in reading that segment of the episode, and for those of you listening, like basically someone on the team is like an amateur baker, and volunteers to bake a bunch of cinnamon buns and ends up baking like actually a huge amount of cinnamon buns because apparently there's like an industrial baking machine or something that he just happens to have because why not? And then this is like people don't know about it, so Marie's going around, hey, come have cinnamon buns, we have all these cinnamon buns, and really trying to get people to like get excited about these cinnamon buns. And I thought there was like definitely like a metaphor in this part of the story of just Marie really trying to get people to be excited about something and really empower people to be excited about something that maybe they didn't care that much about. But there was a lot of like pushing or like kind of getting forced, it wasn't like everyone's like, oh my God, there's cinnamon. I mean, people got excited about it, but it was just, so there was that piece of it. And then the other was something I caught earlier in the episode was there's a character or an employee who mentioned that he felt not included with the soda machines because he's diabetic, and that wasn't brought up at all with the cinema.
Here we go, another sugary.
Yeah, like here's more sugar, and as someone who
another sugary snack
has also experienced this, where it's like I have my own like stuff where I can't have certain foods for allergies and whatnot, and company like, oh, pizza, everyone loves pizza. It's like, no, everyone doesn't love pizza, and like not everyone drinks alcohol, so happy hours, like, and so it can be very isolating. So I felt for that character, and I thought, like, why did they even choose cinnamon buns? How is this, like, it just felt like like it felt like throwing random stuff at the wall and trying to see if it would work without actually digging deep to like, what do we really need? Because it's not cinnamon buns. Like cinnamon buns are not going to solve this company's problem. Just like happy hours and pizza parties and soda machines and nap pods won't actually solve these like fundamental challenges. So I don't think the cinnamon buns are a great example of something that could be done to foster trust. Like in many ways it was it illustrated to me or really brought up even more of the issues this company is facing, including they're not really including people in and thinking about what the company's needs are, and they're really just trying to put band-aids on like a viral infection, which won't solve the problem, will not solve the viral infection.
I think that's a great take on it, and also when is sugar the right solution?
Right? That should be on a t-shirt. When is sugar the right solution? What problems does sugar actually solve? I mean, there's some chemistry problems for sure it could solve, right? Yeah. But definitely it's not going to solve anything amongst toddlers and children or employees, right? Which are just grown children ultimately. So
but
yeah.
I think it's an interesting take. I did consider when I read this. We recently, in a recent episode, there was a town hall which was a very like formal event where Marie's team had planned a workshop to really go in and talk about the cultural values and talk about these different values that were defined previously, and that was a very like a formal way to kind of talk about culture, where I feel like this event was a bit more, it was very informal, it was very random. It seemed like it just, it was very random who was invited. It was completely like just a random mix of people, whoever Marie just met. But anyway, in this at this event, people actually got to have some conversations, and they also talk about like how this is actually this helped us have a lot of conversations. So it's also interesting to me that such a random event helps them solve things that they haven't been able to solve in other ways. And I also noticed how Natalie took that occasion to kind of share about the news about the CFO position in this very random group of people.
Yeah.
I feel like it doesn't seem very thought through. It doesn't seem like they think a lot about how to kind of communicate. It's very, it's just, it gave me a red flag.
Oh my God. Well, me too. Me too. I literally wrote down, I was like, what? Like, just, I wrote down, like, I'd like to see better leadership from Natalie, who, as the CEO, so far seems to be a bit like laissez-faire on this whole thing. Like, if the company is going to take these changes and growth seriously, I think Natalie has to be a bit more on board. Like how she just randomly revealed about the CFO amidst like, yeah, this just kind of, I was just like, wait, what just happened? Which I have witnessed happen in companies, like stuff like that, where big changes just kind of slip out from a C-level person, and you're like, wait, did you just say, like, it wasn't thought out, it wasn't, crafted, it wasn't, the way it was delivered wasn't really thoughtful in terms of how people might want to receive this message and the best venue for that and who needs to know. And I do think when you bring people together around an offsite with the state of the union of sorts, where you announce these changes with a bit more organization and thought and strategy behind them, right? Versus the casual slip out of like, oh, well, now they were going to know eventually anyways. Like,
Yes,
let
because
it be a time where everyone gets to share what's on their mind and get aligned. Like, clearly people at this company have thoughts and concerns that are building up and either bursting out at various moments, kind of sporadically, like the whole like, oh no, they cleaned out my creative thought room, right? And people have a moment, or it's driving them to leave because they're not feeling heard and included in the team. Like that's their attrition issue, is like this stuff is building up, and when people feel like they aren't able to be like bring themselves to work, and when I say that I don't mean like bring their hobbies like knitting or baking bread, I just like be able to be feeling like safe and heard and considered as part of this team, and they don't have a way to vocalize that and have it incorporated or even just listen to, that stuff starts to build up. And if you're like, well, I can't change here and I want to grow, then I better leave. And that's such a common experience. And the fix is actually more simple than all the complicated stuff that they've been doing. And like, they don't have to bake, a zillion cinnamon rolls. They just need to listen to people and figure out how they can be a little bit more considerate and thoughtful about how they're communicating and collaborating with each other, especially from the leadership, like the C-level and VPs that don't even seem aligned among themselves. So how are they supposed to build a team that's aligned and all going in the same directions if the leadership isn't even aligned?
Yes, and I think also, at least think about maybe sharing these news with the direct reports first, because I do think we kind of saw a reaction from one of the finance people who actually got up and left when this was announced. And I also read that as if that was, that was a kind of also a concerning reaction to just get up and leave. Like,
Yeah.
is she going back to tell her colleagues? Is she like super upset that it was Shaq? Is she excited? It's really, yeah, and it doesn't really seem like anyone pick up on that. So that was also just to, to add to your point. I agree.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really like great observation of just like how we notice people respond. Like some people like, yeah, walk out. Some people might be thinking stuff that we can't even see. And this happens a lot with fast growing companies or companies undergoing a lot of change, where things start to happen so fast that people start to feel left behind or feel like unconsidered, especially when there's information hoarding and like information leakage. I don't know if we want to call it that, where things are either not shared or they're shared in a way that doesn't foster more trust and collaboration. Instead, it diminishes it. Because like you said, if they went to the direct reports first and said, hey, here's what's going on, we're going to tell the whole team later today, we wanted you to know first so you're prepared for that and you're not surprised, like that would have been such a different experience for everyone, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
What are we thinking about the chief of sales becoming the CFO?
Well, this goes back to the it feels like they're throwing darts at walls and there's no like what are we trying to aim for here? They didn't really establish they like the fact that Mark was like, I have finance experience, and then it was like, wait, did you want this role? And or no, that was the CFO situation. So, but it's very similar, right? Where they're not taking into account what they need for the role, the skills they need for the role, the skills of the team. And this came up too with Marie, with Joseph. No, not who was it that said Eric, that was like, Marie, you should be on the engineering team and be like a coach. And it was just like it's happenstance, right?
Mm.
It's not like here we've identified that this is the kind of person we need for this role. Here's like the skills they need. Oh, this person has a skill, and like match it over. It was very like it's all very subjective. I think this team could really benefit from doing something like Clifton Strengths or one of the other, many ways to kind of see what people's skills are and make sure people are in the best roles for them. And if they're not, seeing if there's ways to move them around versus just like doing it based on one or two people's opinions about someone's performance, like actually put some research and metrics behind it. Yeah, I think that would be tremendously helpful. There's another exercise I've done with teams called Thrive, Tested, and Thanked, where individuals reflect on and write out where do they thrive, where do they feel tested, like where are they most challenged, and how do they like to be thanked. And then they share that with their teams. And what we start to see is one, there's a lot of simple things we can do to appreciate one another, right? Because usually cinnamon buns are not on the list of ways they feel thanked. It's like, I want someone to tell me I did a good job, and that's not that hard to do. And what we learned from the thrived and tested piece is we start to see where people thrive and what they do really well, and then also what really challenges them. So we get to see where can people be better supported and where might they be tested in their role, and maybe they're thriving in their role or not. And so that these kinds of frameworks, I think, would be really helpful to introduce to this company so that they're not basing these decisions and big decisions around putting people in leadership roles, basing those on subjective feelings and not like objective information.
In your experience, though, Mary, do you see that companies are generally good at being thoughtful around decisions like that?
Some are more than others. I think, the answer no one likes to hear is like, it depends, right? And the companies that are growing really fast tend to be the ones that struggle most to take that breather, to be like, let's really think about this. And, a lot of my career has been made up of working with fast growing companies and seeing what happens with teams that just get kind of shuffled and thrown into the deep end. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's no right or wrong way to do any of this. There's just like, I mean, back to what you said earlier, like you can't do anything wrong when you're improvising. It's just decisions, and there's consequences to any decision. And so there are going to be some consequences to just like throwing people into roles haphazardly. And there's also consequences of taking time to like think it and strategize, and like, because there's time there, right? So there's, either way, there's going to be effects of that, and some you might like and some you may not. But I do think that the fast growing companies that just kind of throw people into roles often are the ones that experience challenges similar to Zebra apps, right? Where you have sometimes information hoarding, there's communication gaps, you've got folks leaving, all this kind of stuff builds up. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, I would definitely say there's some imposter syndrome going on at this company, Marie in particular, where people kind of overcompensate. They don't ask for support. They feel like they have to have all the answers, and then more mistakes happen or more stuff happens that and has to be fixed later. So I think the fast growing companies will experience a lot of this, that turmoil and the chaos. And then ultimately, like, stuff breaks and then they have to fix it. And sometimes that's okay. If stuff breaks and then you fix it versus trying to fix it before it breaks. But sometimes when you're more thoughtful initially, stuff breaks less, or it will cost you less in the long run, because attrition is expensive, poor performance is expensive, and that all trickles down to maybe product launch delays or customer dissatisfaction, lower sales. So they would benefit from taking a beat. Companies can benefit from taking a beat and just like thinking through some of the stuff, because the cost of 2 days of really like thinking through this, or even a month of thinking through something and trying to like be really thoughtful, will actually save them on the back end. So I think that yeah, it is common in companies, and especially fast growing companies. I like to say that companies that are growing really fast, the only thing that grows as fast as kind of venture backed fast growing startups is cancer, and cancer kills us. So like that's
very
the
dark.
reality, right? So
Yeah.
like you gotta be careful about that fast growth. There's consequences to it.
Yeah, true.
I think this is a perfect segue to ask about, when you were reading through this, besides the two methodologies that you've already mentioned, are there any theories or methods that you thought about?
Yeah, one that came to mind was the book and kind of communication framework, I guess, by Kim Scott, Radical Candor. I think this company has, as we've talked about, some communication barriers. We've got Mark hiding things. We've got Joseph just blurting out claims to employees, or employee in this case, Marie. We've got someone who can't have sugar, who has expressed feeling unseen with these sugar-laden perks. So there's definitely an opportunity for some honest, clear, open, and candid conversations. So I think that would be really helpful for them to really use as a way to improve their communication. The other I mentioned, like doing something like Clifton Strengths, where they're looking at team member strengths and areas for improvement, rather than using subjective opinions about which person is good at which role, which they're doing now. They could have some more like evidence behind it, and also that can feel really empowering to people to be like, oh, I'm really good at this. Like it makes sense that I'm running sales, or it makes sense that I'm in this role. And then one more that I'll talk about, and this is something we use, we developed at Improve. We use a lot of these like different frameworks like Radical Candor and Clifton Strengths to just like inform some of what we do. But what we developed at Improve is called core character work. And what this does is it helps people evaluate what their core tendencies are, like what's their core character, and then the we build that capability to expand and broaden their range of capabilities. So if this is your core character, you tend to play, you show up with these habits, you tend to be really good at this and you lean into this, great. But we need to build that resilience to broaden that capability so that they can be adaptable in fast changing companies. So for this company, especially since they are putting people in unfamiliar and new roles, like the new CFO without finance experience, or Marie going into an engineering team, we could look at their core character, how they're showing up today, what skills do they need to get better at, and then we start to do some work to broaden those set of skills, so that all of a sudden, if they were just using a hammer before because that's what they needed and that's what was helping them get their job done, we give them a screwdriver, a saw, an Allen wrench, and they still have that hammer, but now they have different tools to deal with different scenarios, which is so critical in a company that's growing fast and putting people in roles where they may not have a deep expertise or a lot of experience working in. So that would be something that I think could be really beneficial for this company, to get people in places as individual contributors and as a team to better work together.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I also loved how just also to your point earlier, when Eric, Marie's colleague, says that he thinks she should be joining the engineering team, he also just casually like promotes himself to head of development HR. It's like, so I can just
Yes.
do your job while you're away. It's like, okay, that's
Well,
interesting.
and hmm, I thought that the way that was done, and this is something I don't think I recognized, I definitely did not recognize earlier in my career, but later on, more, I'd say more recently, in like the past 5 years, I noticed this more as I work with more teams of how you should do this, right? Like, you'd
Mm,
be so good at this versus asking Marie, what do you think about this role for yourself? What do you
mm,
think about trying this? Or can I share something that I think you'd be great at? Versus this, like, I know all or I know better than you
yes.
attitude that is very prevalent here. And it's not, I'm not going to make it a gender thing, but in this particular example, this is a man telling a woman, you should do this. You'd be good at this. And I've seen this so many times at companies, and I've experienced it certainly in my career. And I notice these dynamics more and more now that I'm, really entrenched in this work of working with teams and growth and uncovering those barriers to growth so we can remove them so that the growth can happen. And that undermines someone's like self, right? By him saying
Mm,
that to Marie, he's not asking Marie what she thinks about it. He's
mm,
not respecting Marie's opinion about it. He is making a statement to say, you'd be good at this, which will come across very differently than if he were to say, have you ever thought about coaching engineering teams?
mm.
Because I've noticed and really stepped into that a little bit different. Similar to how, I mean, even we had the situation where Joseph's like, I think you're
Yeah.
anorexic. Like, what?
That's exactly what the next thing I was gonna ask about.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
no, do
Yeah.
not say that to someone. Like, if you're concerned about someone, there's a better way, a more compassionate way to bring that up if you're going to bring it up directly with someone. But making a bold claim and accusation like that is just another symptom of this kind of uh, not thought out, how do we communicate with one another aspect. So, and that's something I love about using improv techniques because we could put people in scenes, right? Improv scenes where they're in a scene where someone comes to them and tells them, I think you're anorexic. And then that person gets to feel what it feels like
Mm,
to be accused of something or be told something that maybe they don't actually believe is true or feel like. So there's empathy building, right?
mm,
Or we get to put Eric in a situation where someone comes to him and says, I think you'd be really good as a intern, and see what it feels like when someone just tells you that you should have a job that's not the job you have now. Like, what if Marie really loves her job and then all of a sudden she's told like, oh, you'd be really good at this. Like it again, and it just surfaces and allows people to put themselves in the other person's role, in the other person's shoes, to
mm,
recognize that how they say something makes a difference and how like intent is different than impact. They may have the best intentions. Eric might have intended to give Marie a compliment and tell her something that would make her feel really great about her career opportunities, but the impact may not have been there. It could have been. I don't know. I'm not Marie, but we can start to like at least help people understand how they're coming across because most people are not aware of how they're coming across. Also, Joseph's intent might have been he's concerned, he cares for Marie and he's concerned. But the impact of that, like, that could be really, really detrimental for someone to walk into work and be told something like that is, you not, could go really awry.
mm.
So giving people the opportunity to develop some self-awareness and like situational awareness to be more thoughtful about how they communicate and the potential impact of how they communicate would be really beneficial for this company and most companies. Like, I mean, again, I see this a lot where companies, especially fast growing ones, don't always have these kinds of tools and training to communicate better with each other.
I am interested to dive a little bit deeper into this because we have two characters here. We have the chef, Joseph, who's been keeping an eye on Marie's eating habits and has concluded that something is awry, and is trying to intervene. And then we have Eric, who is also kind of this figure that steps in several times during the story and tries to help Marie with certain things. Both of them are incidentally men, and the way that they try to take care of Marie, in your opinion, are they actually helping? Are they making things worse?
I don't think they're making things better. I think the big lesson here is that the way you approach a situation makes a difference. If you think someone's in trouble or you're concerned for them, making a judgment or bold statement is far different than asking them questions about themselves and how they're doing. Like, it's like condemning someone versus being curious about someone, right? Joseph, in this example, right, could have asked Marie questions, could have been like, how are you doing? Like, I've noticed that your behavior's been different. Like, I don't see you eating the same foods you did before. Like, what's going on? He could have been curious, but instead he jumped to a conclusion, right? He concluded that Marie was anorexic by a few observations. He expressed, and that he expressed concern, but in a way that was, jumped to a conclusion. You can have a concern and be curious. And then on the flip side, right, you've got Eric, who thinks he has Marie's best interest and thinks that there's this opportunity. But again, the way you approach something makes a difference. Like, and what's the right venue for something like that? To just randomly approach someone on your team and say these things, whether it's concluding that, oh, you're anorexic or you should have this role. What's the context for that? Like, it goes back to like Tiny Things Tuesday or these team rituals where's the venue for people surfacing conversations like these or conclusions like these, if at all? I mean, I really think it's so inappropriate for that chef to have said that to Marie. Like, that definitely is not going to make any situation better. I mean, Marie, we could probably spend an hour talking just about Marie and like her role and what she's going through. But I think the overarching thing here is like how you approach something makes a difference. And the way that these situations were approached, it's like, does it build the team? Does it build trust? Does it foster collaboration? Does it foster connection? Does it foster productivity, or does it not? And neither of those examples strikes me as something that would be beneficial and like foster more trust, more like empowerment, more collaboration, higher productivity. It may not totally diminish it. Again, it depends on how these individuals respond to it too, right? Because I'm also, I don't know Marie well enough to, know like how she would respond to this. And I think there's some nuance here, right? Because everyone responds to these things differently. If someone said those things to me, I might respond or react to it different than if they said them to someone else, based on our backgrounds, based on what we've experienced, right? Based on who we are, based on our neurology. So I should preface everything I say with that. Like, these are just, I'm pulling some best practices. Like, best practices around communication would say, don't tell your colleague to their face that you think they're anorexic. That's,
good best practice. Yeah.
good best practice, right? But that doesn't mean that one individual might not that might just roll off their back, and someone else that could be crushing, right? Someone else might quit the next day, because you don't know. We don't know. Maybe Marie experienced an eating disorder as a teenager, right? We don't know that. Maybe a dear friend of hers did, right? And so having some sensitivity to how we say something, or just being mindful of how we might be coming across. And always, I think the best practice is choose curiosity before a conclusion.
Mm.
Be curious before you
Yeah.
conclude.
And once again, curiosity is one of the values of CBRAPs. Just saying, I've said it a few times before. It's so ironic. But yeah, and I also just to again to just say, I think this is a really good example of how people can have really good intentions but still end up communicating poorly. I do really think that it came from a good place from both of them. I think that, as you say, Ivana, they are trying to look out for her. Eric also started the suggestion of her changing roles with talking about how she's way in over her head and she's like very stressed and all these things. So I do think that they seem to care personally about her, but I also agree that it's just very, very poor communication still.
Yeah, and that's there's room for improvement, right? And no
Yeah.
company is perfect. Every company has its body odor. You just have to learn to live with the stench, or make it smell a little bit better, cover it up with some deodorant or something.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, AK, I'm thinking of starting to round off.
Yeah,
That
I
was
just have one thing that I
yeah,
wanted to, if
go
it
ahead.
is okay. I actually have more things, but I can start with this. I just wanted to ask you, because I think in this episode it also becomes really clear that there's just like, speaking of bad communication, that there's really something wrong with the communication between Natalie, the CEO, and Mark, the VP of HR. And I think in this episode, Marie kind of gets a little caught in that dynamic, because she gets in the middle of this, and it's even like Natalie tells her about the CFO thing before she talks to Mark, and then she tells Marie like, can you just tell Mark about this?
Yeah.
And Marie's like, what? What do you mean? Like, why do I have to tell your employee
Yeah.
this? Like, it's all really weird. So I was just curious to hear, like, if you had to kind of help Marie or CBRAPS with this leadership
Mm.
dysfunction, how would you approach that?
I feel like this is like an interview question. Yeah, I do think that, oh, speaking of improvising, I need to plug my laptop in because it's going to die otherwise, and that would not be great. Um, so I do think that Mark's leadership is being a little bit undermined,
Mm.
because Natalie is not going to
Yeah,
direct there, and it doesn't sound like, from what I've read and seen so far, that Mark, Natalie, and Marie have like clear, defined working roles and relationships. Like, are Mark and Natalie meeting one on a weekly basis? Like they should be, like, because Mark's the VP, right? Marie works for Mark. Mark works for Natalie. It got
exactly.
me curious, right? Back to like curiosity over conclusions. My curiosity is like, why? Like,
Mm.
why is Natalie going to Marie and not to Mark? Like, is there some dynamic there between Natalie and Mark that has Natalie afraid to approach Mark? Did something happen? Um, is there a tone? Like, this is another piece too that you can't tell from reading something. Like, what's the tone of which people are
Yeah.
communicating with each other? Because tone impacts everything. And Mark strikes me as someone who has a bit of a dismissive tone when people come to him with things. And I don't know because I haven't heard him, but like based on the clues I have so far, I would be curious to know what that tone is, because that tone can really discourage people from coming to them. Like I always laugh when someone's like, "Oh, I have an open door policy," as like an executive, And I'm like, yeah, your door is open and you encourage people to come in, but when they come in and ask a question, you have this tone that's like, that's a stupid question. So yeah, no one's going to come in. So again, back to that big overarching lesson, the way you approach a situation, the way you say something, the way you communicate has an impact. And so the more aware we can be individually about how we show up and come across, the better it is for everyone on the team. And then in terms of Marie, like what could Marie do? I think because Natalie's coming to Marie, right, and came to Marie and she's kind of like, wait, like I'm telling Mark, like I think Marie needs to set some boundaries and maybe spend some time checking in with herself. I'd be curious. I sense, and again, there's a lot of things I'm more curious about with this team, but I sense a bit of imposter syndrome with Marie. Like she's tasked with solving this big problem and she's like taking it upon herself to figure it all out herself and seems to take on things that may not actually be her role to take on and would be better suited for other people to do. Like in that moment where Natalie says, oh yeah, you just tell Mark, Marie could have been like, I think it's really important that you tell Mark about this. Like this is a big deal. And coming from you is going to be really important for you and Mark to talk about directly. But I think what I see in Marie, again, without knowing her, like seeing how she interacts, is that, maybe she is like, has a little bit of a people pleasing tendency, like kind of type A, like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. I can take this on. And really trying to impress and achieve, like really achievement oriented. And maybe I see part of myself in Marie because I've totally been in positions like that where I was, tasked with just like doing this and then doing this, and you're in a fast growing company, and then can you do this? Like, of course I can do this. And then I remember, I know I was promoted at some point at this high growth startup and tasked with things I really had no idea what to do, and I was figuring it out as I was going along, but I took it upon myself to figure it all out myself when I really could have asked for help and support from my team and colleagues and counterparts. But I didn't because the dynamics of the company made it kind of fear-based of like, well, if I show that I don't have it all figured out, like maybe I'll get fired, or maybe I'll get yelled at, or maybe I'll feel like I'm dumb because the way someone responds to me and their dismissive tone. So I think I see a little bit of myself in Marie of just this person that would take on everything that was given to me because I knew I could figure it out and I wanted to achieve things, and busy was a coping mechanism. And then you hit that point where it seems like Marie is hitting, where she's hitting a wall with stress, right? And it's affecting her physical health. And so boundaries and like some self-reflection and some time for Marie to be like, whoa, I need to like, what am I doing? And what should I be doing? And having that conversation with Mark and Natalie, right? Because Mark is her direct boss, but now Natalie's kind of prescribing her things to do or tasking her with things, and Mark gets kind of cut out, and then Mark's hoarding information. So I think a sit down between the three of them to just take a beat again and talk about what everyone's doing, how they can better communicate as a leadership team. I think if I were to come in, I would certainly facilitate a conversation between the three of them and really start to uncover what these dynamics are so that they can be aware of them, which is kind of step one of what we do at Improve, is like acknowledge the reality of the situation, right? That's the saying yes part of saying yes and improv. Like just acknowledge the reality. The reality is Natalie is the CEO. She's tasking Marie with stuff and having Marie tell Mark. And there's this kind of triangle, situation here. That's the reality. Okay, then we say the and part of yes and. What are we going to do about this? And what? And now what? And then the second part is like, we say take everything as a gift. Like just be grateful for the behaviors and dynamics that got us to where we are today. They've served us in some way. Now they're not working for where we want to go. So let's like appreciate them so we can move on. And then we play the scene we're in. This is the new scene where we have these goals that are not going to be reached by how we're communicating today. So what can we do today? What behaviors are we doing today that aren't working? And then we replace those with new and improved behaviors. We like to say, if it feels weird, do it, because you can't get new results doing the same things as before. You need to make new choices. So we identify new choices and we integrate and embed those choices. So this might mean like we discover, okay, we need to do a weekly, Natalie and Mark need to do a weekly one-on-one. Mark and Marie need to do a weekly one-on-one. And Natalie needs to go to Mark with things and Mark's going to Marie. That might be one, like that might be the new choice, right? Then we embed that, we start to practice that until that new choice becomes the now choice. And we, rinse and repeat this process for anything that's kind of broken or feels broken, that's not working anymore. So that's what I would do to kind of address that particular dynamic with Marie, Mark, and Natalie is really, and they have to be part of that process. I can't come in and tell them the new choices to make. I can come in and facilitate them having a discussion and a process for them to discover the new choices that they need to make, because then they're like empowered and brought in of like, oh, we need to do this, because that's how it's sustainable. That's how it sticks for lasting improvements.
That is really great advice. And I also like your, if it feels weird, do it. I like this kind of
It should be a
approach.
t-shirt.
And I think, yeah, it should. That should be a t-shirt. And I think one of the last things I just want to say before we round off is I really got a vibe from this whole episode that there is kind of a shift. And I think especially towards the end where they clean up, or by like the basement is clean. Because I mean, previously in the story, we've heard how they had this pile of junk in the basement, and I think I've talked about how I saw that as a metaphor for all the junk in in Zebra Apps' kind of culture. And now they've had people clean it up, and it's clean. So I feel like this is a good time for a fresh start, and that's just like what that's something I just thought about.
I
Kind
like
of that
that.
symbolizes, it's
It's like a metaphor,
yeah.
right? It's like
Mm.
you clean up, you organize your space, and it starts to organize your mind and gives a little bit of a fresh start. Well, maybe that's what will happen next. Maybe they'll have like have some team meetings in that room to kind of start over, or at least build from this fresh space, right? Of this blank room or this blank space, and not let past behaviors and dynamics dictate. They can inform, but not dictate where they go from here.
Exactly. And I think that's maybe what Ivanna was going to ask you
That's
before when
brilliant.
I had more questions.
It's emerging in the room without me even having to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is also what I hope for Zebra Apps going from here, that they can start fresh and build something new, perhaps with less sugar.
With less sugar, yeah. I think that's like, I'm hearing like 3 key lessons, right? Like the way you approach a situation makes a difference. Like you need to acknowledge the root of the problem before you can move forward to fix it. And sugar will not solve your company's culture problems. More sugar does not mean better performance. In fact, it might be an inverse relationship.
It's extremely important.
For all of you out there considering sugar as a solution, it is not it.
Sugar is
More
not
cake will not help you.
That could be a t-shirt too. Sugar is not the solution.
Yeah.
Well, Mary, it's been absolutely lovely having you on the show with us. If our listeners want to learn more about you, what you do, or have follow-up questions to anything you've said, where can they find you?
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Mary Lemmer is my name, 2 M's in the last name. And then my website for Improve is chooseimprove.com. And you can find out all about us there. You can contact me through there, and would love to, chat more about this with anyone who wants to, and connect with listeners. Likewise, just connect with people who want to talk about this stuff and learn more about how to improve for themselves, their teams, their companies, so that they don't end up over sugaring their companies and they actually lead to real change.
Yeah, well, I hope our listeners take you up on that offer.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Mary. This was amazing.
So fun.
Thank you.